and welcome to tonight's episode of The Republic of Middle-Aged Men. I'm your host Tim, and joining me tonight is Ruben.
Yeah.
And Lachlan.
Howdy guys.
How are you, gentlemen?
Good, mate.
Yeah, travelling alright.
Very good. Do you have a beverage this week, Ruben?
I do. I have Captain Morgan's spiced rum on the rocks.
Ooh. Lovely. How about you, Lachlan? Oh, sorry, Ruben. Continue.
Oh, you get it at Audi and it's reasonably priced. No, a mate from work got me onto it, and it's very nice.
Very good. How about you, Lachlan? What are you drinking?
Yeah, I should have joined Rubes. I've got a Kraken spiced rum kicking around downstairs, but instead I've sort of stuck with my G&T, but just switched up the gin this week. So I've got Gordon's Sicilian lemon flavored gin, which is
I've tried
nice.
that one. It is good.
I sort of go, let's go Mediterranean style, since we're, not quite the right country, but, we're in the right neck of the woods.
Now, when you said downstairs and referred to liquor, I just immediately pictured a room, a wine room. Like, have you got a wine cellar or something epic down there?
No, it's just my studies upstairs and the...
Oh, that's disappointing.
The drinks are downstairs. That's it.
I'll stick with my imagination because it's amazing.
Infinitely better. Imagination's always better, right? I must say, it is the one thing that's missing from my sort of man study that I've built up here, is that I should have a bar cart of some variety in here. I think it's
nice.
It's should be mandatory. I think.
Or one with with the silver pewters and all that sort of gear.
Oh, for sure.
I'm pretty sure Volkswagen do like a combi front mini fridge.
Sure.
I think I've seen one at one of the Volkswagen dealers floating around.
Yep.
That'd be cool.
I'll have one. We soon to be sponsored by Volkswagen. Shoot me a fridge.
Yeah, good on you. All right, so I am drinking, and I'm going to mispronounce this horribly. It's the Kuroyoshi Pure Malt Whiskey, aged 12 years, and it's a Matsui whiskey made in Japan. I'll put it up to the camera for those watching. And yeah, I do like Japanese whiskey, and I do like 12-year-old Japanese whiskey. It is very nice.
Nice choice.
Yes, it's good. So how's the week been? Lachlan, I'll start with you. Any fun things?
It's been pretty quiet, I guess. Work's been busy, so obviously we're still in lockdown. So just doing things around the house where you got the time. Sort of sticking to my fitness thing, which is great. Got my new runners I was waiting for last week, so got a couple of runs in, which is good. Not super duper motivated though. Like I'm sort of dragging my ass back in gear, but starting to get there. Watched a few.
I forgot you were doing that. How's that going? The whole fitness thing.
Look, not too bad. It's I can definitely feel like the fitness is improving, but I'm not seeing any benefits around the waist, if you know what I'm saying. But I might have to I don't know, change up my diet just a little bit just to see some benefits there. But
you're a middle-aged man now. It doesn't come easy. Apparently, that's what they're telling me.
Hey, this is just natural dad bod 24/7 going on here. So
there's this Athlean X guy I watch on YouTube sometimes. He's really good. He's super famous. He did this thing where he got his young guy who trains with him to do burpees while he did like an 8-minute video. And at the end of him, he goes, "Do you want to know how many gummy bears you just burnt?" And it was like 3 gummy bears or something stupid like that. And he goes, "The point of this video is to show you can't outrun a bad diet."
Yeah.
I was like, damn it, he's right.
Yep.
Wow.
No one likes that news though. So
no, I much prefer drinking my whiskey than having a good diet.
Because I always reckon, people who do exercise tend to be, hungrier and kind of eat worse afterwards. So I think it's something, if you're trying to get somewhere, you probably need to have a plan and a bit of conscious will to do something about it. So we'll see if I change gears. But anyway, I'm happy to get a little bit more fitness anyway. That's good in any case.
Very good. And how about you, Ruben? Did you end up doing any fitness?
Pass. Mine was alright. Like it was pretty standard. I'm more worried about the kids at this stage. So they're starting to go bounce off the walls a little bit.
Yeah.
With not going to school and that sort of gear, but no, my week was okay.
Yeah, good. For me, I had little COVID scare at the start of the week, but that was all good. But I had to I was a casual contact for a day, so I had to isolate from the family. That was weird. So
That's
I just,
not cool.
Yeah, but I took appropriate action and played Xbox.
Yeah,
so that was good. And my friends were there for me, so we could do some Battlefield in preparation for the next Battlefield game. And this is a weird old week. The homeschooling thing is obviously challenging when you also work, and that's been a real learning for us this week as well. But we're doing pretty good with that. And
I think it's fatiguing no matter what. I mean, you talk to any parents about that, and that's it's hard yakka for sure.
Yeah, I actually think Socrates said this. I remember reading it a while ago about not discouraging someone even if they're learning really, really slowly, as long as they're moving forward. I can't quite remember the exact quote, but like that idea came to mind this week of just if there's any movement forward, then happy days, and throw lots of praise in that direction, and good job, all that sort of stuff. So
they say you catch more flies with honey than vinegar, mate. So
yeah. I mean, to get them to do the work is challenging. A guy I used to work for, I remember once saying to him, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. And he went, yeah, but then you can feed that sucker a whole lot of salt. I was like, oh, that's a good counter to that. So, anyway, speaking of Socrates and guys like that, I think we should reopen our books.
Sure.
So, have we mastered our Greek pronunciations yet? We've got Thrasymachus.
It's Thrasymachus. We're moving away from Thrasymachus.
I'm going to struggle now because I just sort of got that sort of built into my brain last week. So we'll see how we go.
So last week, as we sort of wrapped it up, we were about halfway through book 1. So Lachlan, do you just want to quickly summarise where we were up to, and then we'll get into it?
Sure. So look, we kind of kicked it off last week with Socrates sort of heading out from a festival, gets bailed up by an old mate and sort of invited over to his house for a chat. He has a bit of a yarn with the fella's old man, and they sort of get onto a topic about, I suppose, like, what was his life lessons out of a long life? This man's father, and is well advanced into his years, and he dropped a bit of wisdom on him as far as I suppose he'd lived a good life and he's a happy man, and that in age he's sort of mellowed, and he's happy because he can sleep at night because he's got a clear conscience, because he's paid his debts, and he's done no ills or evils, so he can sleep well at night. And this sort of brings out this conversation about what is justice, I guess, and they go to probe onto that a little bit further, and Cephalus, the old man, decides to bail out and tag his son in to have the argument, because he says, you're right, it's more complicated than kind of what was set out. So that's basically what we sort of discussed in the first part of the book, is this sort of conversation. In the end, this is Polemarchus we'd been talking to, and his sort of landing as they've sort of had this conversation with Socrates is that a a just man should do injury to no one, good or bad. And this is where they sort of finally sort of end this debate. And they've both kind of finally agreed on this point after sort of throwing things back and forward for a period of time. And that's basically where we finish up, and we get a bit of a strong interjection at this point.
Yeah. I also feel like that was a really good summary, by the way. I feel like that part of the conversation so far has been amongst people who are kind of friends.
For sure.
It's super chill, and
it's a very cordial debate.
Yeah, it's very loose and very agreeable with each other about maybe this or maybe that. It's very brainstormy, and I think as we move into this second half of this book, there's a really big change there.
Yeah,
you could say that.
Yeah, Ruben, I think
that's when Thrasymachus comes in over the top. I like this cat. I like his style.
So take us through that.
And the way that he describes it, or Plato describes Socrates thinking about it, is like, yeah, it's like what you said, Tim. He's cool, just chilling, having a chat, and then Thrasymachus basically just butts in over the top and just starts swinging almost like insults at Plato.
It's 100% insults.
It's a total change in tone. He basically comes in over the top and he's like, "You guys know what you're talking about. Plato's a fraud. You guys are all falling for this crap." And that's kind of his attitude towards Plato, which I kind of. The thing is, he's sort of portrayed as really aggressive and sort of almost unreasonable, but I actually agree with a lot of what he says. I think some of his criticisms of Plato are fair.
Absolutely.
But I think basically where he kind of starts out with is basically saying, this guy is just sitting here and just asking questions. You guys all think he's a genius, but he hasn't actually said anything. He's like, he basically says, Plato, mate, he's Socrates. If you know what's going on, tell us what's going on. You're a pretender, basically.
Yeah, I think he just sort of said basically, Socrates, you're sitting there with your ironic style, just basically flipping the opposite of everything that somebody says. And, anytime you try to nail you down, you sort of duck and dodge out of the way to avoid answering it and try and flip another question back at the other guys. So he's dead right. He hasn't offered anything up at this point in time. He's just tearing everyone else's ideas down.
But in defense of that, I did that by accident this week. In that I saw someone put a post up on Facebook, and it said that the opposite, that failure is success for what doesn't matter, or success at what doesn't matter. That was it. So failure is success at what doesn't matter. And I thought, hang on, what would Plato do? Socrates do with this? Here we go. No, that doesn't work, because failure at what doesn't matter is still failure. So how can success at what doesn't matter be failure, as well as failure at what doesn't matter be failure? It doesn't make sense. So I'm like, that's a stupid thing to... and I just wrote it off. And I've never done that before in my life, I don't think, of actually looking at a thing like, what would Socrates do here? He would go, well, what's the opposite? No, it doesn't work, because it's the same answer for both.
So true.
That's pretty much what he's doing. So,
yeah, pretty much.
But it doesn't define, well, what is success? So I think it's the same thing here.
Yeah, in my book, one of the first things he says is, he goes to Socrates, you know perfectly well that it's easier to ask a question than to answer them.
For sure. I think that's the really interesting thing, is basically he turns around and says, okay, the whole argument up to now is complete crap, and I want to disallow everything that Socrates has brought forward and propose that it's complete garbage. and let me tell you what's up.
I really liked Socrates' description of him. Like, Socrates, when he describes him, just comes across as an absolute wuss, like just a massive pussy. But I don't know whether I'm reading it wrong. or whether he's been a little bit tongue in cheek, like being a bit sarcastic. So
I,
I don't
I
know
didn't get that vibe.
that he was
It
being
might be
sarcastic, or
both.
that he was like, because I was staggered by his attack, and I looked at him in dismay. You know, if I had not seen him first, I believe I should have been struck dumb. And I'm like, oh, man up, dude. But then I was thinking, is he actually like, oh, what is this? Oh, how could this angry man be here? Or is it more that he's sort of being very sarcastic? What do you reckon?
I think it's actually coming back to something we observed last week, which was that this thing about having a debate amongst your friends clearly has this sort of set of rules and social doctrine about the way that you argue something, right? Because quite often when you sort of hear them talking about different aspects here, it's like they have to kind of like establish the premise and the rules of the argument, if you know what I mean. And
Yeah.
that if you're going to have the argument, everyone's got to agree to the rules of the argument before they sort of start to debate it, right? So it's almost like this guy is kind of challenging and sort of saying, you guys aren't following the proper rules of debating here. And I can't remember what the phrase is that he sort of uses, that or basically like you're just giving in to Socrates or something like that, You're just giving into his debates because and in fairness, he just wears you down, right? Because the guy just keeps hammering you like until you give in. And I think he's quite rightly sort of saying, you guys just have kind of lacked the balls to kind of stick it to him. And
in my translation,
that's why he's pissed.
He calls them silly billies.
Yeah.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it says he roared out to the whole company, "What folly, Socrates, has taken possession of you all? And why, silly billies, do you knock under to one another?"
Knock under. That's the word I was looking for, because I looked that up because I was like, I hadn't heard that expression before. But it's basically to give in to the argument without fighting for it.
Ah, right.
I
But
think
that's
the
not
audiobook
even in
we
my
had.
translation.
Oh, okay. I think the audiobook we had said "give way," and I thought of like English politics. Like I will give way to the gentleman. That sort of thing. Okay, so
but yeah, basically
we're all in agreement with this part.
Yeah.
He's firing up. So Ruben, what do you think his main initial statement is then?
Well, yeah, he basically comes across the top, and there's a little bit of a discourse where Socrates has to almost tease him, or almost trick him into actually committing to a position, because Thrasymachus is basically saying, I don't need to say anything. You've got all the ideas, put it on the table, and then Socrates basically almost tricks him into the opposite. But I think Socrates is right. He basically goes to him, "No, you've obviously got something to say, buddy. So what is it?" And that's where it gets interesting when he does when he sort of lays out his argument, because it immediately becomes apparent that his argument is in line with his character and the way that he's behaving. Because what his argument goes on to be is basically that justice is, I forget the exact wording, justice is the will of the powerful, or the will of the stronger.
I've got the quote just here if you want.
Yeah, go for it.
Oh, yeah. Oh, sorry. Yeah, the will of the stronger. I had that sort of like quote that he has about the government and what have you being the stronger party. So it's he's saying, in all states there is the same principle of justice, which is the interest of the government. And as the government must be supposed to have power, the only reasonable conclusion is that everywhere there is one principle of justice, which is the interest of the stronger.
Yeah. So basically, whoever's in charge, whatever they say goes, in layman's terms.
And to him, that's what justice is. Yeah, whether it's good or bad is kind of irrelevant. It's the follow through of whoever's stronger and what their ideals are.
Yeah, and I reckon it ties back into the start. Remember in the first one where they're walking down the street and they come up to him and they're like, "You have to come with us," and he's like, "Well, why don't you make us?"
For sure.
And then this guy, this Thrasymachus, obviously kind of represents the kind of the thinking or the idea that, whoever's got the most power, they get to decide what's right and wrong.
Yeah, and just before we move on, that sounds really familiar for some more modern thinking. And we talked about this a little bit offline. Like, just coincidentally today, I decided to wear my Karl Marx t-shirt, that has the famous quote on there that says, "To make an omelette, you must break 100 million eggs." But I don't think Karl Marx is entirely wrong in that he kind of points out a similar issue. It's just his solution, I think, is entirely wrong. It's like saying, I keep grazing my knuckles when I play on the ground, and Karl Marx says, "Yeah, you're right. Let's cut your arms off. I'll fix that problem." Like it's not the right answer. Like he's noticed, hey, you're grazing your knuckles, but I'd like to keep my arms. So anyway,
well, I mean,
what are your comments on that?
Well, if you in terms of the historical context that this conversation takes place, there's something called the Sophists, and I'm just basically regurgitating what I've sort of heard other history of philosophy people say. So this is not my own thoughts, but I think it sounds accurate. Essentially, around that time, a lot of Greek philosophy had given up on the idea of absolute truth, and it had kind of, their philosophy and their politics had degenerated into this idea that basically all that matters is whether you can persuade someone of something. And that's what the Sophists were. The Sophists were traveling teachers that were paid to teach essentially rhetoric and persuasion. So they'd gotten to a point where philosophy wasn't really progressing because you had this a whole bunch of people, the academics and the philosophers of the time, where essentially all they did was teach people how to manipulate and persuade people, and that was kind of considered the height or the be end or all end of what Greek philosophy had come to. And Socrates is obviously coming into that environment, and he's saying, no, there's got to be more to truth and justice than just what you can convince people of. So I'm not sure whether he actually refers to Thrasymachus as a sophist, but he does refer to him as a philosopher, and he's essentially what you would call a sophist. I guess if you had to pick like a modern day equivalent, it'd almost be like somebody who doesn't care about the truth, but just cares about persuading people. So maybe mainstream media these days. A little controversial, maybe.
At first, I thought you were going to say like a lawyer.
No, actually, a lawyer. That's perfect. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah. But I see the parallel that you drew.
Yeah, it's interesting though too. Yeah, because you see with Socrates, he keeps on sort of pushing and saying we want to find the truth of this statement, and that's he seems to be sort of pulling apart his arguments to a degree to sort of say, I understand that's what you're saying, but let's question it to find the truth of your statement, right? So he goes, the statement's worth nothing without the truth of it. And so that's what his questioning is about, is to try and uncover that truth. So, because that comes up a whole bunch of times on there. So I think
that's like a major
thing on there. Mm.
And like you notice that when Thrasymachus starts attacking, and this plays into the whole, you can see that sort of Socrates is like, you're just a sophist, mate. But he doesn't want to come out and say, you're just, there's something wrong with the way you're thinking. His manner is to tease it out. But he goes, when Thrasymachus is accusing him, he goes, for if we were looking for gold, you can't suppose that we would willingly let mutual politeness hinder our search and prevent our finding it. Justice is more valuable than gold. So you're right. You can see that his whole thing is like the truth and justice is more important than material possessions. Yeah. Which I don't know whether that was unique for the day, but that's like in direct contrast to somebody who is just interested in persuasion and power. And that's what these two characters, I think, are really. They're almost two ends of a spectrum kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, I think we've introduced the two of them arguing pretty well. So I think let's move on a little bit. So just after they have this sort of initial confrontation, I think Thrasymachus is essentially saying, I'll bet you that I've got the answer and you don't. And I love how they say, he's like, oh, but you won't be able to pay me. And Socrates is like, yeah, I've got no money. I'll give you praise if you're right, but I've got no money. And he's like, oh, well, that's a pleasant notion. And I like how the others at the like Glutton says, oh, don't be under any anxiety about money, for we will all make a contribution for Socrates. So the room's obviously turning on this guy a bit, saying, oh, you want to make a bet? We'll back Socrates with this one.
Well, I mean, you do get it at some point in time. I think Socrates actually calls on Glutton to sort of like back him up. Will you back me on this argument? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, yeah, man, I'm with you. Let's keep going.
Yeah. So basically, Thrasymachus comes out and says, it's justice is the will of the powerful, and then Socrates starts to pick it apart.
Yeah, he's sort of like challenging. I think that sometimes the followers of the ruler may follow a command or something like that, but it may hinder the ruler unintentionally, if you know what I mean. There's a question, I think, around the weaker are supposed to follow the rule of the rulers, and but sometimes they may actually do disservice to the ruler by following that instruction. So should they follow the instruction or not? That's kind of where Socrates was going with it.
Well, his basically first question to Thrasymachus is, well, are leaders infallible? And his immediate response is, well, no, they can't be. Of course they make mistakes.
Yeah.
So Socrates' basic point is like, well, is it still justice if what they're doing is wrong? Like, you know what I mean? Yeah. I actually think it's on that point that I think it's at that point that Thrasymachus is lost. As soon as he makes that concession, I think his argument. Well,
he turns it back over. Oh, you're right, and he does lose it. Yeah, and then he sort of tries to flip it back and say, "Well, that's okay. Scratch that. Let me reiterate what I really meant, which is that there is no intention for there to be an error of judgment or whatever it is.
Yeah,
so it's still in the interest of the stronger, right?
And that's how they get into that real weird stuff where they start then again talking about, well, what is the purpose of a doctor? And if a doctor does it wrong, is he being a doctor? I got a little bit lost there. I thought that was a bit of a weird argument. It was like he was basically saying, well, I mean, if a doctor makes a mistake, is he really a doctor? And to me, that's where it got a little bit abstract for me. I was like, oh, I don't really follow this bit.
Yeah, look, I think there's a whole bunch that they were sort of tossing back and forth there, trying to find this truth. But I think sometimes you're right; it just becomes so abstract. It's hard to sort of bring it back to a real application for the argument. You know what I mean?
Yeah. What did you think, Tim?
Well, I think happily there's other examples, and I think they point to the same point that the Doctor one's trying to make. So I really liked the horsemanship one, because I thought that was a good analogy. So where it says, nor does the art of horsemanship consider the interests of the art of horsemanship, but the interests of the horse. Neither do any other arts care for themselves, for they have no needs. They care only for that which is the subject of their art.
That's right. It's basically, tell me if you guys agree, but my understanding of that is like they're basically saying when someone paints, like if someone paints a painting or whatever, if a doctor serves a patient, they're automatically doing it for someone else. They're not doing it necessarily for themselves. They might get paid, they might have some benefit out of it, but he's basically saying that those kinds of arts and techniques always have somebody who's almost essentially weaker or lesser than them in mind when they do it. Is that kind of where that's where I came in on it? That's
exactly where he's sort of where Socrates is trying to lead that one too. He gets down to, I think, he did the same thing like with the sail, the pilot, of a ship.
Yeah, the captain.
And saying that he's not doing it, for himself. He's doing it for the benefit of the sailors, right? So he went through a whole bunch of different ones. And I think it's interesting that it sort of got turned around a little bit with Thrasymachus, who sort of is getting the shits with this line of query once again, and sort of comes on to that whole, do you think the shepherd's in service to the sheep? What's wrong with you, Socrates, you idiot?
He's fattening him up to sell him.
Yeah, so like, what's wrong with you? And this brought about like another sort of interesting way to, I think, where Socrates actually starts to sort of make a few decent points, I think, now, like, if you know what I mean.
Just on
that, so I kind of...
Oh, sorry.
Go, Tim.
I was just going to say, I think the problem there with his comeback is before they went down this path, this Thrasymachus guy's basically gone, remove the person making mistakes. And I think Socrates' argument is then more than that. I think he's saying, let's remove human nature, period, around greed and self-interest and making mistakes. And then what would this look like? Which is why I think he can say, like, the doctor is all about the patient, not about the doctor, because, like, we know in our experience, and I think historically there's a good argument for this, that doctors do make money. And part of why anyone does any profession is to put food on the table and to make money. And Socrates, because of their changing of the argument to remove the error, I think he's also removed the what's the word I'm looking for? That he's removed the selfishness of humans from the task, and just looking at it purely as like, if the person was perfect and they're just doing their profession for the profession's sake, then this is what it is. Which I think is a good way to attack the problem, because it does remove that human element. But I think the comeback about the sheep thing is a reality check.
Yeah.
Well, this is actually what happens.
And look, in fairness, he drops a bit more reality on him too. So, like, he goes on. I had a few other notes here. The just man will always come off second best in a contract. The just man's going to pay more tax than an unjust man on the same amount of income.
I think that's where the argument shifts, though. Like, it kind of moves from what is justice to almost a utilitarian argument by Thrasymachus that I could be wrong. He kind of says, he kind of shifts the argument. I feel like he's kind of losing grip of the argument, so he shifts it to essentially say, you know what, though? Because who cares? Because the unjust person is more successful. So he kind of shifts his, what do you call it? His measurement.
Angle of attack.
Measuring. Yeah, well, he's, what do you...
Well, I think you're right, but I don't think he's shifting it. I think maybe, and this is a big thing for me to say, quite an arrogant thing, but maybe Socrates overreached. Like, so he's actually said to him, now let's remove the person making a mistake. And so Socrates has gone, let's remove all of those human things that cause error or cause it to go wrong. But it might not be what the guy wanted. Like, if you were talking about the doctor scenario, he might be saying a doctor can make a mistake, yes, but that doesn't mean he's still not a human being who's being a doctor, because it comes with social status and wealth and all those other things. I think Socrates has just removed all those things. So maybe it's not a change, maybe it's more of a correction of, that's not quite what I meant. Like, that's not real. Let's look at reality. Maybe it's something.
I think the thing is, though, that
what is important is what works, is kind of where he goes to.
Yeah.
Anyway, sorry.
But also, I think, like, you've got two guys who've got very different ways of thinking, because Socrates is a man of black and white, good and evil, and Thrasymachus is a man of shades of grey, right? There is no good, there is no evil, there's just stuff back and forth, right?
Works.
Yeah. And that's where he plays, whereas Socrates is in this land of good and evil, And so they're trying to have this argument, and I think you're right, Rubes. Like, they're both using different measures of success, right? And that's why neither of them will kind of concede, because they're both seeing the argument on a different scale.
Yeah, I know that at the start of this series, Tim, you mentioned something. You said, "Oh, it'd be interesting to see this dusty old book, what applications there are in current day." I think that dynamic that's described in this chapter is something that is still debated, and you can still see it in today. You can see it in politics. You can see it around the office. You can see it in the way that people behave and the way that people think. I think it is really just two diametrically different worldviews.
Well, 100%, and even critical race theory kind of uses this argument in a way of saying that everything that's in place, pardon me, is already built upon the sins of the past, so to speak, and so it needs to be replaced. I'm not an advocate for critical race theory at that level, but I think it's still like it's a similar mindset. I think you could say of the whoever's in power sets the morals, and whoever's in power sets what is justice, and so and I think that gets explored further in this chapter as well.
Yeah, but earlier on you mentioned. Yeah, sorry. Go.
No, you go, mate. You go.
Earlier on you mentioned Karl Marx, and I agree totally. But for me, I hear the way this guy talks, and I'm like, yeah, there's two common factors here, and one is power as being a determining factor in morality, and the other one is utilitarian. So what works, and you can see both of those things at play when it comes to more modern thinking. And that's not just Karl Marx. I'd say that's probably a similarity with Nietzsche. It's a similarity with a lot of 20th century thinking.
Yeah. So
I
anyway,
think,
to your original point, there's definitely some relevance.
Well, relevance, but I think it's fascinating that as much as things have changed, they've kind of stayed the same.
Yep. Did you want to add to that at all, Lachlan?
I was just going to sort of mention, I suppose, like Thrasymachus's sort of closing argument, I suppose, that he sort of had. Just it's a bit of a full stop, I suppose, for this thing, which was it's kind of like injustice is celebrated not just by those that get ahead, but by all who benefit from it. And and I think that just speaks to this guy's mentality, like.
Yeah. I like
if everyone's making some green, then like.
But I liked Socrates' response, which, if I can bastardize it, he basically says, "Yeah, look, but justice still has to exist, and it can't be any of the things you say, because if it didn't, then criminals wouldn't even be able to exist. There has to be some level of justice in between thieves, or they'd all be ripping each other off. So for cooperation, you need a concept of justice." So he kind of almost goes like, "Yeah, but there's still a standard, and everybody has to live by it in some capacity. So you can't be right." Which I think he nails him.
Well, he does, but that's really interesting though, because that's where Socrates starts to bring in some shades of grey. He goes from his good and evil to say, well, everybody evil must still have a bit of good in them. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Which is maybe him conceding a little bit of the real world view, right? Rational, makes sense though. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. But I think it points out like another fundamental difference between the two. Like Socrates is almost like there's an ideal up here, right? And then the other bloke's kind of saying, I don't care. I decide what works and what the ideal is. And whereas Socrates is kind of trying to reach to something outside of himself, whereas the other bloke's almost saying, well, we decide where it is, where the line is.
Yeah, and that kind of like start getting onto this angle they're talking about. So Socrates kind of like winds back a little bit about that art of the shepherd sort of business, and I suppose that a leader is more concerned with the benefits of his subjects, as through their benefits, they also succeed, right? But Thrasymachus is still sort of indicating, I guess, that rulers like to be rulers. They like to be an authority, and that's kind of that. That position, they want power and they like being in power. And this kind of changes, I guess, the sort of tact of the argument a little bit now, because they,
I think you're right.
They start to argue that sort of point about, do you really want to be in power or not? And they're on sort of different sides of the fence there.
Yeah, I agree.
So,
And sorry, you go, Tim. I've got the full stop for the discussion. So you go do your thing, and then I'll come in at the end.
well, I was wondering, are we going to push through to the end of this chapter?
I think we do, because my full stop is essentially they come around to the end of it, and Socrates basically goes, "This is all good and well, but at the end of the day, we still haven't defined justice."
Yeah, I think, like, the conclusion that my translation says, I'll read this part and then we'll discuss it. So, we have admitted that justice is the excellence of the soul, and injustice the defect of the soul, ? That has been admitted. Then the just soul and the just man will live well, and the unjust man will live ill. That is what your argument proves. And he who lives well is blessed and happy, and he who lives ill, the reverse of happy. Certainly. Then the just is happy, and the unjust miserable. So be it. But happiness and not misery is profitable. Of course. Then, my blessed Thrasymachus, injustice can never be more profitable than justice. So that's kind of where he takes it to, get past the that doesn't work in the real world thing. But it's not. I think it's how do I say this? Both things still sort of remain at that example. So the point that Thrasymachus is making around the unjust person having more profit, well, that kind of remains. But the soul currency, so to speak, of the just person
also still remains. Yeah.
Remains. So I think you're right, Ruben. At the end, I really like how this is described when he talks about, like, well, we still haven't actually figured this out. So after that, it says, "Let this Socrates," he said, "be your entertainment at the Vendidii," whatever that is. And he goes, "For which I am indebted to you, now that you have grown gentle towards me and have left off scolding. Nevertheless, I have not been well entertained, but that was my own fault and not yours. As an epicure snatches a taste of every dish which is successively brought to table, he not having allowed himself time to enjoy the one before, so have I gone from one subject to another without having discovered what I sought at first, the nature of justice. I left that inquiry and turned away to consider whether justice is virtue and wisdom, or evil and folly, and when there arose a further question about the comparative advantages of justice and injustice, I could not refrain from passing on to that, and the result of the whole discussion has been that I know nothing at all, for I know not what justice is, and therefore I am not likely to know whether it is or is not a virtue, nor can I say whether the just man is happy or unhappy."
It's almost like Socrates just wore him down, and he's just like, "I'm out."
That's exactly how it is, and you could tell, like, Socrates knows that's how he's won, right? And I think he's just like feels like he's cheated himself in the argument in some ways. It's just kind of like, he keeps doing, flipping things on him. Socrates likes to deal in absolutes. Only a Sith deals in absolutes. And, the opposite of a truth is not always true, but Socrates seems to use that in his arguments all the time. And, I think it feels like he's cheated himself. So it's be interesting to see what the next chapters sort of bring out. So
when you said only a Sith deals in absolutes, I immediately went, "That's an absolutes."
That's an absolute.
I like the analogy. It's kind of like Socrates is saying, "There's a buffet here, and I came here to try the prawns, but dim sims came past.
I see dessert over
and
there.
Then many things came past, and I just kept eating all these things, and now I'm full at the end of the meal, and I didn't get the prawns."
I still had the dim sum in my mouth while I was reaching for the whatever.
In that quote, who is it? He said that he's like someone. Did he say I'm like Epicurus or something?
Oh, Let me see.
Yep, something like that. Yeah.
As an epicure.
Yeah, I don't know what that means, but I know that there was a school of thinking which was essentially, and I don't know whether it came later, it essentially said the way to happiness is basically moderation. Enjoy a little bit of everything. So I don't know whether that's like kind of a critique of that idea. Saying, yeah, it's all good and well to enjoy a little bit of everything, but you don't actually get to understand or enjoy anything that way.
Yes. I think the quote is, pleasures without limits are but punishments. That might be one of the quotes there. Have you got something to add there, Lachlan?
No, I was just going to say, that kind of circles back a little bit to like the original conversations with Cephalus, because he was talking about, as he got older, sort of moving away from the pleasures of food, drink, and women and whatnot. So, maybe Socrates was feeling guilty for giving into the whims of the argument as a
yes,
as a spice of life that he could not resist.
It's so true. He's such a nerd. Like, he feels bad about it as if it was someone that's just gone out partying all weekend and got drunk and hooked up with all these chicks, and they feel bad about it on Monday morning. But his hangover on Monday morning is, I've enjoyed too many ideas.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Well, actually, I'll give an analogy that's relevant for me. It's like I turn on my Xbox to keep playing Assassin's Creed Valhalla, and then I see that three of my friends are on, and it's Battlefield time. And then it's 1 a.m, I'm tired, and I didn't make any progression in Assassin's Creed. Same problem. Well, that's it there, good. And that was good.
I really enjoyed dissecting Thrasymachus. I still prefer Thrasymachus.
Me too.
Well, let's move on to our other regular segment, which is taking a stroll down to the pub Philosophers. So, Ruben, I'll hand over to you. What's your discussion for the pub Philosophers today, as we polish off our drinks?
Oh, right. I actually watched a TV show that I enjoyed, which is very rare for me. Anyone that knows me personally knows how much I hate television and movies at the moment, because I think it's all rubbish, and I think Hollywood should just burn to the ground at this point. But no, I watched this show, and it was I thought it was legitimately good. But what was weird about it is, so this show came out in 2020. The show is called Utopia, and it's a remake of a British show. I haven't seen the British one. So the British one's from 2013. Anyway, this show came out in September 2020, but it was filmed in the year before. As you know, they don't just film a show overnight. So it was filmed before the pandemic, and then it came out after the pandemic. And the plot of this show is basically that there is a rich oligarch, and he's trying to trick the mass population into taking a vaccine that sterilizes them. I'm sorry if anyone wanted to watch it, and there are spoilers, but it was worth it. I don't even know whether the show was particularly good, but I was just watching it, and at the start of every episode, the poor suckers that made this show have to have a disclaimer. Disclaimer basically says, this is not based on any real pandemic or virus. This is a total work of fiction. I can just imagine they've put this show together. They've slated it to come out in September 2020, and then the pandemic hits. I can just imagine these executives going out of their mind. They're like, what are we going to do? We can't air this.
That's really funny. I wonder how long it'll be before that warning will be before the Planet of the Apes movie.
Hopefully never, brother, but hey.
I love that trilogy. It's really good.
What is that coming out of her nose? Spaceballs.
Nice. That is not on iTunes, by the way. I was looking. No? It's not there. At least not in Australia, but I need to get that movie. And neither is The Room.
Oh, boo.
I know. Actually, have you seen The Room, Lachlan?
No, I'm not familiar with it.
Oh, we had an exercise of watching The Room, Rubes and I, with our wives, and that was a night well wasted. But I will revisit it. I am going to watch it again.
It gives a whole new level of so bad it's good.
Do you know Tommy Wiseau?
No.
Oh, okay. We'll educate you on this. It's right up there with The Republic for sure, for its influence on culture.
And equally profound.
Oh, completely.
There you go.
All right.
I'll put it on my list.
And how about you, Lachlan? What's your pub topic? No, pub philosopher's topic.
Yeah, I've been sort of ruminating on what I'm going to do with a bit of workspace in my garage. So I've got a few tools and I've got a bit of space, but I want to kind of get things organized. And I've been researching today, building a workbench and sorting out all my tools and getting it all nice and organized, maybe even a little bit of memorabilia up on the wall, all that sort of thing. But yeah, it's kind of exciting. It's something I want to do since I moved house last year. And pandemic's a good time to do all these little projects. So that's what I'm doing at the moment. So I was actually measuring up timber and all this sort of stuff to get my cutting list. And I haven't built anything with my own two hands for a long time. So kind of feels a bit therapeutic. I'm keen to get into it.
Nice.
Yeah, nice. Are you going to include the kids with the build?
Yeah, look, I was watching a couple of YouTube clips on people who are building workbenches and stuff today with my middle child. So he's 8 years old. So he was quite interested by this sort of process. I think he'll be quite engaged and keen to do it. My older son, I don't think he'll have too much interest in it. Like he'll come down and go, that's interesting, and then like wander back to what he's doing. But
I think that's an eldest child thing.
I don't know. It's funny. My middle child, he just loves looking at stuff like that. I remember we had a trip to the doctors once, and everyone was getting their vaccinations and stuff like that. Just the normal stuff, the 4-year-old shots at all, whatever it may well be. And he was there, like saying to the doctor, "Can I like watch while you give it to my brother?" It's like, "Yeah, sure, buddy." And like he like wants to like watch the needle go in and all this sort of thing. He's like really interested in the detail. The doctor's like, "Man, nothing's phasing this kid," like.
Nice.
Well, the needle's not going into him, is it?
Well, no. But I must admit, even when he had it done to himself, it didn't really phase him too much. He's like, Yeah,
Interesting.
Cool.
How about you, Timmy?
Oh, well, as I said, I had a night in ISO, so that was good to reflect on just how much time you do spend with your family and how important it is to do that. It was good. I used it as an opportunity. Something I learned a few years ago. Like if something's frustrating you, it can point you to anger, or it can point you to being thankful. So I just went, well, okay, this is something that I usually get access to and usually get to enjoy, but today I don't. So I'm going to reflect on all the times I have enjoyed that and look forward to getting that access back. And then thankfully the test came through that night while I was asleep, and happy days, able to get up and go inside and give the kids a hug. So that was really good. And yeah, I've still chipping away at this other book I've got. It's I'll put on camera. It's this little map book. It's a bit cheesy with some of the comments it says on the cover, but it says philosophy, everything you need to know to master the subject in one book, a degree in a book. Which, if that's true, why are the university courses so expensive? So I'm guessing it's not quite true, but the content within it is in such a really helpful way of doing things. It's got these really cool sort of mud map pictures and little flow charts, and just tells you who these different people are. So it's a good book that kind of gives you some understanding of all the different periods of time. There's little bits in there about Marx and guys that I would not normally take the time to read. Like I know the Communist Manifesto is one of those books on the philosophy classics, and I might read it
short.
one day.
It's super short, man. Like, it'll take you an hour.
Yeah, there you go. Well, it's like number 300 on my to-do list. So, whereas this gives me a one-page summary. So I'm like, oh, okay, that's the punchline. I'll run with that. So I'm enjoying that. I'm just doing one chapter a week of that as well, and that's really good. So
good on you.
Yeah. Well, I think that's it. Next week we're going to move on to book 2. I'm guessing we'll probably have to split it in half like we did with this one. I like how there's absolutely no spoiler in the title. It just literally says book 2.
Yeah.
So no spoiler alert there, which is helpful. Just before we wrap it up, just give a 30-second. How are you finding the read so far? So I'll start with you, Ruben.
Oh, as I said last week, I'm really enjoying it. I just even enjoying the way it's written. There's nothing really quite like it, so it's good.
Yeah. And how about you, Lachlan?
Yeah, like I mentioned to you before, you know, I'm not particularly scholarly with these kinds of things, and it's not the sort of thing I'd normally go out and read. So I was sort of setting out feeling a bit like this is going to be my English homework from high school, but I've actually been enjoying it. So it's yeah, like Rubes had said previously, like it's actually pretty easy reading. It's got good humor in it, and it's very conversational. So it actually puts you in the time and place really, really well. So you can kind of almost visualize yourself, you know, sitting there in a toga, you know, leaning up against the wall with a drink, listening to these guys having an argument, you know. So or a gentlemanly debate.
Yes.
How about you, Tim?
I'm really, really enjoying it. I've listened to the audiobook, this first book, I would have to say at least 3 times now, and I've read it probably 3 as well. I've been writing through my book, but my grandmother, who has had a chat with me earlier this week, who will probably end up listening to this, she wants to borrow my book, and I said to her, well, no, because I'm writing all through it, it'll be messy, I'll get you your own copy. And she said, no, I want to read your one so I know what you find interesting. And I'm like, oh, okay. So like she'll find things like lol, backing Socrates to win written in my book. she'll just probably think, what does lol mean? So I'm looking forward to that. All right, well, thanks for joining me again tonight, fellas. It's been fun, and thanks to everybody who's listening. We appreciate you participating. Follow up on last week. We are on Spotify now, which I'm super pumped about. So that's really good. We should be on Apple Podcasts if we're not already by tomorrow as well. Or obviously on YouTube and Facebook. There is a Facebook group. If you want to join the discussion, we'll be hanging out on there from time to time, having a chat about where we're up to. And remember, the Republic wasn't built in a day, and neither were middle-aged men. And long live the Republic. And we'll catch you guys next week. Thanks, guys.
See you guys.
Take care, everyone.